All right, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Lev Kalmans. I'm an info librarian at the Arlington Heights Memorial Library, and I'm glad you were able to join us today for Getting Started Writing Grants. I'm happy to introduce Sam Adams Lanham, who is the Community Engagement Librarian over at the Barrington Area Library, and she is the presenter this evening. So, Sam, it's all yours.
Great, thank you so much, Lev, and thanks everyone for having me here. I told Lev when he asked me to do this, I grew up in Arlington Heights, so Memorial Library was my library from birth till about 18. So it's very special to me to get to present here. So thank you very much. So a little bit about this program, just so we kind of set expectations for what it's going to be. When Lev and I spoke, I know that he teaches a class on the Foundation Directory Online, which is a database of grant-making organizations that allows you to search for who are the funders that are looking to support exactly what you are doing in the area where you are doing it. So that's not really what this is about. I had offered that class a number of times to folks at my library. There's a community foundation in Barrington that has a major grant cycle that wraps up in January every year. And I was in the habit of doing workshops for those people, just, putting together the pieces. And what I discovered in doing that is a lot of us haven't written for somebody else's consumption in a long time, right? If you're not a recent college graduate or haven't, taken classes or don't write professionally, you haven't had to write in a long time. And it can be really intimidating or just overwhelming to sit down and try and figure out, where do you begin? How do you do this? So while I was in library school, I took a couple of instructional librarianship, and my undergrad is in instructional design. And I worked as a writing tutor while I was in college. So I pulled together some of that and created this class. And so far, people have told me that they found it helpful, at least in getting them back in the habit, get back in the game of writing. So what we're going to talk about, we're going to talk a little bit about writing as a process. We're going to talk about the different modes of persuasion. How do you bring somebody around to your point of view? And I'll share some other resources with you. And then we are not, in fact, going to workshop that. I should have taken that out, but I will definitely take questions at the end. So when we talk about the writing process, we tend to think of, you're going to write something, you just sit down at the computer and open up a Word document and you start writing, right? And it's actually a lot more complex than that. And that's, I think, part of the reason that people get frustrated is that they expect to be able to sit down and just type away and everything will fall into place. But there's actually 6 or 7 steps in the process. So first comes the pre-writing, where you are, we'll talk about this kind of generally, and then we'll go a little bit more into what it means when we're talking about writing grants specifically. So you're kind of inventing in your head what it is that you are going to write. You're collecting the information that you need to be able to write it, and then you're organizing that information. Once you've done those things, then you move on to creating a first draft. And often people think once they've got that draft down on paper, they're done. And that is rarely the case unless you are very gifted or very lucky. So once you've created a draft of what you want, then you need to go back and revise it, try moving things around, that sort of thing. And finally, proofread. And proofreading is, fixing spelling errors, fixing grammatical errors, making sure all your tenses and pronouns and everything agree. So that doesn't mean that you are not allowed to write anything down in the pre-write process. It can be very helpful to take notes as you go along. You'll find data points or particularly poignant stories that you want to be able to come back to. So make note of those so you don't have to shift through all of the data that you've collected when you begin writing so that you can find it again. And the final thing is these are intended as guidelines, right? Not rules. For example, I can tell you when I'm doing things, if I spot a misspelling, I usually have to fix it immediately, partly because I won't be able to see anything else on the page, and partly because if I look at it often enough, it'll start to look like it's spelled right to me, and I'll never fix it until I send it off and then realize that I still have a misspelled word in there. So, as I said, it's a guideline, do what works for you, but just kind of do a mental check that you have gone through all of these steps as you go along. So I do want to just talk about this because if you haven't written a lot, or if you, I think it's particularly for people who read a lot, but don't necessarily write a lot. I love this, it's not quite an essay, it's not quite a quote, but Ira Glass is the, and now I'm not going to remember the name of the NPR program, This American Life. But, basically saying that when you start creating anything, whether it's art or writing, music, you're drawn to it and you usually have good taste in it and you can discern good from bad when you read it. But your skill level doesn't match your taste level yet. And so you read your own work and you're really disappointed in it because you know what's good and you know that you're not there yet. And that's the point where a lot of people quit. But if you keep pushing forward, just keep working on it, keep asking for constructive feedback, you will improve, you will get better, and be patient with yourself. If this were easy, everybody would be doing it. So when we look at specifically the PreWrite process as it applies to grants. So this is assuming, let's say you've come to a class on Foundation Directory Online, you've done some research, you've found some grants that you think fit your area pretty well, and now you're starting to dig in a little more deeply. You want to look for, and if you've ever, written newspaper or journalism or anything, these questions will sound very familiar. It's, what are the funders' focus and goals? What are the restrictions that they have? For example, a lot of funders don't want to fund general operating expenses. They want to fund a project or a program, something that they can put their name on. Now, you sometimes can still apply some of the money that you receive towards like paying a portion of someone's salary. But you can't just day to day, this is the electric bill to keep our lights on. Most of the time they will want to fund something specific. That said, recently there's been a little bit of a trend. A lot of the major funders understand that this has been a really unusual time, and a lot of the things that people do generally as fundraisers haven't been an option for the last couple of years. There have been a few galas, but not as many as there might have been in the past. So, but just be careful when you're looking at things that you are falling into their guidelines. Does the work that your organization does qualify for the grant that you intend to request? Are there geographic restrictions as to where the money is used? So Robin, for example, you mentioned that you do work all over the US. If you get a grant from Cook County, they're probably going to want to see that you're using the money in Cook County. Pay attention to application deadlines and start writing well in advance of when things are due. I've really had people who, the opening seminar for a grant cycle was in November, where they taught people how to do it. The due date was in January, and they came in to work with me 2 days before the grant was due. And then they're asking you to come up with things like, we need your organization's tax forms for the last 3 years, or that kind of information. So start as far ahead as you can so you have time to collect all of the information that you're going to need. Also, sometimes they'll want you to spend the money in a certain period of time. It usually isn't a case of, here, we're going to give you $5,000 and you just use it as you need it. It's, for this period of time and this kind of thing. And if you don't spend it in that time, you have to return it. So pay attention to those things as you're going along. And then finally, how. Most funders will have, they'll invite you to submit a letter of inquiry beforehand, just so before you go through all the work of creating the grant, you can get an impression from them right away if you're a good fit for their organization or not. And it'll tell you, like, if you're using Foundation Directory Online or a few of the other online resources, it'll often tell you what the best method is to make your initial contact. And then they also talk about the preferred format. And I will tell you, I didn't used to include that information on here. I have an adult niece who works for a foundation. And she said that's one of the biggest frustrations, is that they have very specific instructions on how they want the material sent to them, and people don't follow those. And it's, you know, it's like if you are filling out a job application and they say, we want this, this, and this, and you need to fill out our online application, and you don't do it, no, that's an easy way for them to eliminate you. If you want them to give you money, follow their directions. So, when we talk about organizing things, some people find it helpful to outline when you're in the organizing stage. Some people prefer to kind of mind map it, you know, have that, this is my central idea. These are the points that I need to touch on. You know, when I was in school, I used to write my first paragraph and my last paragraph, and then take myself from the beginning to the end. So whatever works for you is fine, as long as it's something that someone else in your organization could follow in your footsteps if they needed to. Okay. So in the draft phase, you want to begin to get the words on paper, working with whatever organization schema you've developed. It doesn't need to be pretty at this point, just get things down there. The revise and edit stage is going through, reading things. Maybe, you know, one of the beauties of working with something like Word is that you can just take a whole paragraph and move it up here. Much simpler than when everything was written out longhand. Putting it aside for a while can be helpful once you've got it drafted. If you're working far enough ahead, step away from it for an hour, a day, a couple of days if you can, and then come back with fresh eyes and look at it again. There's, again, we don't want to get too far into the weeds, but there is something called reader-oriented writing and writer-oriented writing. So writer-oriented writing means I know what I mean to say. I know what I want this paragraph to do, but I may assume that my reader has knowledge or has an understanding that they don't actually have because I haven't given it to them. So this is where it really helps to come at it with a, you know, completely blank mind. Can you understand what you're saying if you didn't have the background information that you have? This is also where it's really helpful to pull someone else in to read things for you. It is your responsibility to make it comfortable for them to give you constructive feedback. You know, our friends don't want to say, I don't get it, but you need to let them know that's what you need. You know, it's better to have your friend be your harshest critic than to have the person who's reading the grant be the harsh critic. So make it easy for people to give you constructive feedback. It is very normal for this process to be recursive. That's what the little arrows all over the place are about. You may find as you're drafting and starting to revise that you're missing a big chunk of information that you need, or you need to change the organization of how you deliver the information. So don't let that discourage you. It's very, very common, and that's part of why we take the time to do this in these steps so that you have time to go back and look at what you need. And I already talked about proofreading is not the same as revising. So proofreading is generally seen as the final step before you submit your work, but I'm here to tell you it's okay to do it as you go along, if that works better for you. And we did talk about, or I didn't touch on in the slide back here, the person who taught me this was director of the Center for Academic Writing. And she talked about the 6 steps: invent, collect, organize, draft, revise, proof, and then publishing. So either turning your paper in, turning your thesis in, applying for the grant. Once you press that button and turn it in, you can't get it back. So you want to be sure you've done a thorough job of these things before you do that. Now, having said that, the first grant you write will probably take you the longest. After you've done it a few times, all of these things get easier and more familiar. If you've never had to find your organization's tax records before, the first time you do it is going to be a journey. But after you've done it, it will get easier. You'll know how to do it the next time. So jump back down here. So when we talk about persuasion, and this is, again, a little bit of a theory, but hopefully I can help you to see the applications in your real world experience. So when you're trying to persuade someone to your point of view, there is the emotional appeal, the story you tell of, maybe one person who was rescued and changed their lives after being brought out of human trafficking. Logos is the data and the logical model. There's that saying that, one death is a tragedy, 1,000 deaths is a statistic. So if in your writing, all you're doing is throwing numbers at them, it doesn't make it human. However, your funders are also going to want to know that that your organization is filling a need that exists, that this is a real problem that you're trying to fix, that it's not just a couple of people that you are trying to help. A few years ago, I heard someone use the term anecdata. So there's anecdotes, right? The stories that you hear about things or what your experience has been in a certain situation. And there's data. So it's kind of bringing those two things together. What is the anecdata? So this is the story of one person who may have experienced a horrible thing. And then these are how many other people out there in the world may also be having the same experience, right? The ethos persuasion is partly about the ethical appeal. This is the right thing to do, right? But it also has to do with the credibility of your organization, that you are the right organization to be doing, helping to solve whatever the problem may be. Kairos is timing. And some of that are things like, striking while the iron is hot. I serve on a committee for the Illinois Library Association, and we're working right now on getting broadband expanded throughout the state, particularly to rural areas that don't have good internet connectivity. This year is a great time for us to be talking about that because everybody's been stuck at home for 2 years and they understand why good internet is important in a way that they might not have in 2019, right? So that's kind of a timing thing. It also has to do with kind of your model of intervention. So for example, spending $100 to help educate a 3 to 5-year-old child is a much more impactful use of money than waiting 18 years later and trying to get that person caught up on the skills that they need to function well in the workplace, right? So it's demonstrating that you have a good sense of those things. I should mention at this point, because this is kind of esoteric, I will be sharing my slides. So you will have this information if you find it helpful to refer back to, and maybe you won't. Topos is about the themes. So it's kind of the theme of the work, but it's also about using language that is familiar to the people that you're asking for money, using metaphors or examples that will make sense to them. Sometimes it's called code switching. You know, the way I talk to my 92-year-old aunt is different than how I talk to my 25-year-old kid, right? Particularly in specific situations. So. Some other resources that might be helpful to you. You'll find things on general writing in the 800s section at the library. Grant writing specifically is covered in the 658s. There are a lot of databases that libraries subscribe to that offer services that you would otherwise have to pay for. The library has a subscription, and so your library card lets you take advantage of those things. So these, I link to Arlington Heights databases for businesses and nonprofits and for their online learning. There is a 6-week course offered through one of those databases on grant writing, and that's like grant writing part 1, right? There is a part 2. It is definitely not a thing that can be learned in an hour or 2 hours or 4 hours if this is something that you are going to be doing as a major part of your job or your volunteer work. It isn't that you can't get started, but you're not going to become an expert at it in an hour or 2 of working. There are other online sources that are available to you. Grantcraft is one. Nonprofitready.org. I'll attach the hyperlink to my forefront. They're an Illinois-based organization. Their headquarters is in Chicago, and they kind of work very specifically as a connector, a clearinghouse for nonprofits, funders, foundations, and other organizations. They do charge a fee for membership. It's a sliding scale, but they also have, like, you know, I have 2 or 3 databases that you can use to find potential funders for your organization. My forefront has 200. I'm not sure what they're doing right now. The last I heard, but non-members, when it's not a quarantine, non-members can go visit their offices in downtown Chicago, can go visit the library and spend time there doing research. And there's a couple librarians on staff who will help you. If you become a member, then you can like email them and say, hey, I'm looking to fund this and this and this for this many people in this area. And they will create a list for you and come back to you with, we think you should try these 25 organizations based on the databases that we searched on your behalf. So very handy to have. It's great to learn from other people. If you know other nonprofits in the area, work with them, ask questions of one another. I've done a few workshops where we'll get together and have 2 or 3 hours that will just, people pull out the grants that they're working on, they sit and work. I'm there to answer questions. Other people are there for them to bounce their ideas off of. That sort of thing can be really useful. And then I learned about this recently, and I haven't asked yet, but I did take a 4-hour webinar a month or 2 back. And one of the people who offered that said, you can volunteer to be a grant reader for an organization. So the person who kind of makes the first pass going through the grants that have been submitted and helping them to narrow down who the people are that they're going to fund. And it's one of those, if you want to be a good writer, read a lot. So in reading other people's work, you can get an idea for what's effective, what works, what's just confusing to the reader, that sort of a thing. So I would recommend that if you can find an organization that will welcome that help. So I think I spoke very fast, since I got through most of that in about half an hour. Usually it takes me a little longer. Are there questions that we have? And I am going to end my screen share.
Can you elaborate a little bit, it's Robin, on the grant writing course you talked about through the library?
Sure. There is an organization, Gail provides a lot of the databases that you'll see at a library.
Yep.
And I will let Liv jump in here. There are two options that Barrington offers. And one of those options, Barrington and Arlington have in common. The other one, we have similar things, but slightly different. So the first one is something called Gale Courses. Mm-hmm. Gale Courses are online with a live instructor that it's usually a 6-week course, and it'll be, for example, with most of them, there isn't a formal meeting time, but new material will be released on, say, a Wednesday. And so you'll get some new material, maybe some things they want you to read through. And then there'll be a homework assignment that is due, say, on Friday or Saturday.
Yeah, I've used Gale Courses. I'm a member of the Arlington Library, but not for grant writing or anything like that. It was photoshopping.
Yeah, so. They have, I want to say 4 or 5 grant writing courses that are available. One that tries to be everything. And then there's another one that's like a part 1 and part 2 and a couple others. I think they also offer something that's general fundraising, which is a little bit different. And then Arlington has, I don't know how you pronounce it. Is it Udemy?
Udemy, yeah.
Udemy. And Barrington has LinkedIn Learning, where they have the videos. And I think those are more helpful. Like if you're like, I understand all of this, except I don't know what they're talking about with this bit, then those two options will let you kind of zero in on exactly what it is you're trying to learn, right?
Great, thank you.
Absolutely. One more option, and I, again, just put this in my slides. Northern Illinois University has a School of Nonprofit and Non-Governmental Studies. And their courses, obviously their courses are not free. Their webinars are not free, but they are pretty low cost. So that was a session I did a couple months back that I think it was $50 for 2 2-hour sessions. And they went through a lot of material. And just in general, there are also some recordings that are available at NIU's website that just cover all kinds of, not only grant writing, but many, many different things about running a nonprofit, being part of a nonprofit.
That's great. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely, I will pull that up and throw that in the chat. And this is one of those that as soon as I start to type NIU, Google is like, yeah, the nonprofit center, we got it.
I did post a link for our Gale course page in the chat as well for anyone who was interested in exploring that. Yep.
There's all kinds of things there.
And with the foundation directory online, I'd be happy to, if anybody, you're interested in making an appointment to kind of be shown how to use it, we'd be happy to help you with that at the library too.
That's great.
Yeah. Not there, and it looked like, did you have another database for grant searching? Did I notice that? Maybe not.
Not. I don't think so. I think FDO is the main one.
Primary, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Lord knows. So when you first sign up for Foundation Directory Online, you have to put their book on the shelf. And FDO has been around since like the 1950s, 1960s, or the Foundation Directory. It wasn't online then. So you remember like when we were looking at colleges and there was a book like this thick with the onion skin paper, that's what the Foundation Directory used to be. I keep it on my desk now off to the side and I put my laptop on it. So when I'm doing calls at work, it's not, one of those. But it's so much easier to use now that we have the option of telling the computer what we want it to look for.
You are right, Sam. We do actually, and I kind of never paid much attention to it. We have something called grants to individuals.
Oh, great.
Formerly the Foundation Center. And I think this one is actually I'm clicking on it now, and it is only available if you're in the library. So not able to access it from home. Okay,
thanks for letting me know.
Yeah. And I didn't know if this, the National Directory of Nonprofit Organizations might include foundations as well. Of course, I'm not going to be able to get into it because I don't have an Arlington Heights card.
Yeah.
So but I have to look for it. Yeah.
Any other questions? And I do want to just reiterate that we are do offer one-on-one appointments if you're in need of kind of more. If you have more specific questions about something related to the grant writing or searching for grants, any other kind of more business related questions, either myself or my colleague Diane can be happy to meet with you.
Great, thanks. Great information, guys.
Good. I hope it's helpful to you.
It is.
Right.
All right. Well, if nobody has any other questions, and I think we did record this, so this will be available on the library's YouTube page if you'd like to watch it again later, or we will have the slides available that we'll send out to folks who registered.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time and the information. It was great.
Thank you so much for attending.
Thank you for coming.